And those 5 young lads between the ages of 15 and 30 murdered this year, Chris Donald in particular, murdered in the most brutal racist attack ever in British history in Glasgow earlier on this year, and all of them not even mentioned in the national newspapers, just absolutely buried simply because they don't count. And it's okay for the Muslim moderates to say, well, this isn't in the Quran, this isn't right, but the Quran does say things like, fight those of the unbelievers who live near to you and show them how harsh you can be. Contrast that with the Christian message about those who live near you, which is love your neighbours as yourself. There's a huge difference there. And it's all well and good for these so-called moderate Muslim leaders to say, oh, well, everything from beating up young white lads with baseball bats through to flying airliners into towers, into the Twin Towers, that's not in the Quran. It's all well and good for them to say that, but they have to explain then what these verses in the Quran, which do preach hatred of the unbeliever and violence and murder of the unbeliever, what do these verses really mean? And if they do mean something different, and if they are moderate, and if they can be read in a soft and non-aggressive way, then it's for them to stand up and say, look, these extremists, they've got the Quran wrong, and this is what it really means. And manifestly they haven't. All they say is, oh, that's nothing to do with the Quran, when it's there to read in black and white.
We have to give a sacrifice. And the sacrifice I'm talking about is the blood sacrifice. We have people with Kalashnikovs, and you declare jihad against the kuffar. Get training. There must be some martial arts brothers amongst yourselves. You have to pump into the brothers. What are you training for? It's so that you can get the kafir and crush his head in your arms, so you can wring his throat, so you can rip his intestines there. That's why you're doing training. To rip the people to pieces. Forget wasting the bullet on them. Cut them in half.
And I know from talking to people the length and breadth of this land that the young gangs of thugs operating in Muslim areas do think of themselves as Muslims. They watch things such as rioting in Palestine between the occupying Israeli army and young Arabs throwing stones in their intifada, and they identify very heavily as Muslims with those young Arabs. And in fact, we identify in some way with those young Arabs who are growing up in a country which was forcibly taken from their parents and grandparents, and in which they have no rights, in which they can be machine gunned to death just for picking up a pebble, just for walking down the street. We identify with them to an extent, but the young Muslims in this country identify with them to the extent that they see themselves as running a low-level intifada against British society, which doesn't mean against Tony Blair, because they can't touch him. It means the first white kid who walks down the streets when there's 10 of them with baseball bats. This isn't just thuggery, this is a political, religious, low-level intifada against us and our society. It's not just the 5 lads, the 5 people I've mentioned. This is going on everywhere from Glasgow, Sunderland, West Yorkshire, Bury, Colne, Rochdale, the West Midlands, parts of the East Midlands. It's happening down in East London. Every single night, but especially a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, in every one of these towns there's a white lad somewhere getting the crap kicked out of him just because he is white and just because he isn't a Muslim. Again, the Sikhs aren't doing it, the West Indians aren't doing it. Some of them are criminals, some of them mug people, some of them are into pimps and prostitution. But it's isolated pockets. There's no common link. And the common link with the Muslim community is, well, you only have to watch it. If you see them on the street in any of these places, even groups who haven't met each other, you'll see them shaking hands, talking, they're their brothers, they're their Islamic brothers. Like I said before, they may well drink vodka and so on, but they still regard these people as their brothers. And if you go and talk to anyone involved in the martial arts, anywhere in this country, in any clubs or any people training, they'll all tell you the same story, as over the last year in particular, they've been telling me the same story, that these clubs, they are full of young Muslims doing what the Quran tells them to, and that is learning how to fight, to spread the way of Allah, and to fight the unbelievers. The Guardian or the Observer mentioned earlier on this year how the Dirty Kuffer video, which features various unbelievers, kuffers, George Bush, Tony Blair and myself, and the words that we should be thrown into the fire, and exhortations to all young Muslims to rise up and fight the infidels and fight the unbelievers and get ready to fight. That video was described in that paper and also on CBS's 60 Minutes programme as a cult of enormous popularity among young Muslims in Britain. So, as I say, that's CBS 60 Minutes and The Guardian / The Observer, saying they see what's going on at the top level. Our people see what's going on at the low level, in the streets and in the martial arts clubs. There's a significant section of the young Muslim population preparing for war against the people of this country. It's not to say they all are, it's certainly not to blame them all. It's not to say that Muslims are wrong, but it is to say that there's a strand within their religious beliefs which are extraordinarily dangerous to a secular, democratic, non-Muslim society. In short, unless something is done to nip this extremism in the bud, then we are going to end up with a civil war in our own country. And you can see the very first signs of that civil war and the way in which it would lead to a total suppression of us and our ways in the attack on our Christmas, on your Christmas, on your children's and your grandchildren's Christmas this year. Watch and learn. And more important of all, talk about it now. Because in a few months' time, another strand of our dinification comes into play, binding us like a rope, and that is that in an Islamic society, unbelievers aren't allowed to say anything against Islam. Now, Mr. Plunkett started to introduce a law against so-called Islamophobia, and Clark has said already that he intends to push it through. And this will be a law coming in sometime this year, which would make what I've just said to you punishment by imprisonment for up to 7 years. It's a law which, like the race laws, would operate on the basis that the truth is no defence. Imagine that. A law, supposedly so-called, which says that the truth is no defence. That's a law which overturns at least 800 years of British legal tradition and just throws it in the waste bin. It's a disgusting and despicable law. It's a law which I will be proud to defy and to break and to take the consequences.